It's not really possible to learn all the chess openings you need to know from just one video. If that was the case, well, half of YouTube would not be taken up by chess videos. By the way, did my research on that one. That's totally an accurate stat. But before we get going on the top 3 openings I want you to know as a beginner chess player, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because we will be learning some more as the days, weeks, months, and years go on. Okay, here we go. The top 3 openings that you need to know as a beginner chess player. First of all, I'm going to advise on move number 1 to play the move e4. There's a couple reasons why. Number 1, you get your pieces out faster. Number 2, that tends to mean you castle a little bit quicker because you only need these 2 pieces to get out of the way to castle short. d4 is perfectly fine, of course, but not my recommendation. Now, the 3 openings we're going to talk about today basically are the 3 main responses that black can play. The number 1 response at the beginner levels is pawn to e5. Also, grandmasters still play it. It's not a bad move, of course. Now, at the grandmaster level, the number 1 response is c5, which is called the Sicilian, and I looked it up in my database. What's the 3rd most common move for black? It's actually the French defense, pawn to e6. If you're wondering, pawn to c6, the Caro-Kann would be number 4, but that's not part of our top 3 openings. So let's talk about what happens if your opponent plays the double king pawn. I'm going to advise you here to play the move knight f3. You might have already guessed that. And when black defends this pawn with knight c6, I'm going to suggest you play the move d4. I already want to say that a lot of players as black mess up this early. In this position, there are so many ways for black to go wrong. I cannot tell you the number of beginner chess players that play the move d6. That is already a mistake because when you play pawn takes pawn and black takes back, now you just trade queens. Don't be afraid of the endgame, and no matter which way black takes back, black gets a bad position. If black takes with the knight, thank you very much, you just won a pawn out of the opening. And if you're up a pawn on move 6, that is a huge advantage in the opening. Of course, black could take with the king, but now the king is on an open file, can't castle, nothing's guarding this pawn, and you can just play simple chess. Just play bishop c4, go after this pawn, you're going to castle your king, you're going to put rooks on the d file, and you're doing really well. Now, if there are any kids out there that just really don't like trading queens, I've got a good backup option for you. Instead of playing pawn takes pawn, you can play bishop to b5. I don't like it quite as much, but it's still a very good move. And in this position, you're threatening to pin him and win him, put pressure on the pinned piece. And also, if that knight is pinned, this pawn is weak. So this is not a bad way for white to play as well. Now, black can defend with pawn takes pawn, knight takes, and bishop to d7, but white is clearly for choice because white has a little bit more space. Okay, let's go back to the position where we play the move d4. Let me show you another way that a lot of players mess up as black. They play this move knight f6. Uh-oh, answering an attack with an attack. And then when you play pawn takes and the knight grabs the pawn back, we're going to ignore this knight for the moment by playing bishop c4. Now, why do I say ignore? Well, if you threaten this knight right away with bishop d3, the knight will just run away. Every player in the world will see that. But if you pass by the knight, it turns out in this position, it's really hard to stop the move queen to d5. If your queen gets to d5, you'll be threatening mate on the weak spot, and you'll be threatening this knight. And even if black sees that, it's hard for black to defend. In practice, in beginner's chess, it's almost always the case that white gets the queen to d5 and wins material in this position. Okay, now what if your opponent plays correctly? Let's go back to this d4 move. Let's say your opponent plays pawn takes pawn, which is the best move. Here, you could take back with the knight, but my recommendation is to go back to an earlier video I did on the Scotch Gambit. I like playing bishop c4. We gambit the pawn, we don't win it back right away. And the funny thing is this position is very easy for you to study, because if black plays bishop e7, bishop c5, bishop b4. Against any of those moves, you're going to play c3. This is a bit of a review from an earlier video, but let's just look at one of them, bishop to e7. Now we're going to play c3. We're about to play pawn takes pawn. Get the snowplow, get control of the center. And if black takes, peekaboo, queen to d5, and suddenly it's not that easy to stop mate because this bishop blocks in the queen. You can play knight h6, but I'll just snap that knight off the chessboard, and white is winning out of the opening. Okay, so to review, against double king pawn, you're going to play the Scotch Gambit, and it's so hard for black to keep up unless black really knows what he's doing, but this is mostly about beginner's chess. Okay, let's go back to e4. What else could black do? Well, black could of course play the Sicilian. Black could play c5. There are a lot of options here. The Grand Prix attack, the closed Sicilian, the wing gambit. No, don't play that. Instead, I'm going to have you play c3, which is sometimes just called the c3 Sicilian, and sometimes it's called the Alapin. And in this position, again, in my experience, my vast experience, because I play this as white, black really does not know what to do in beginner's chess. Here's a couple of examples. A lot of times, black just plays d6. And then when you play d4, and black takes and you take, who does not like this opening? White has complete control of the center. White has the snowplow. White's knights are getting to the happy squares, and these pawns are going to be very annoying to deal with. Let me show you another trap that I've used about a million times. In this position, a lot of players play knight c6. Then when I play d4 and these pawns trade, I have a lot of opponents that play this move, pawn to e6, but then I just keep pushing my snowplow right away. And after takes and takes, this knight tries to cover up the e file, but then I play d6. And when the knight moves again, peekaboo, queen check, and no matter what you put on that square, literally, no matter what, I'm just going to take you with my pawn. So you get a very solid structural foundation in the center by playing the c3, and it is the easiest to learn. Now, if you're watching this video and you've been playing chess for 5 years and you play the open Sicilian, congratulations! However, I don't think it's the easiest opening to learn from the get-go. One last one. What do we do against the third most popular opening, the French defense? In this position, not a surprise, I'm going to suggest you play the move d4. And after black plays d5, the number one thing I want you to do is to avoid the advanced French. Because when you push this pawn with e5, all of the play is black's, and black's plan is more clear than white's. Black gets to do the attacking. Black is going to build up his entire army on this pawn, and unless you really know what you're doing, your center can collapse. For example, when black plays c5, even if you defend and black attacks it, even if you defend, black attacks it again, and there are so many ways for white to go wrong in this position because it's very hard for white to develop, and keep an eye on this pawn. And by the way, this knight is about to hop, hop, hop to f5 and create a fourth attacker. In practice, I think black does well in beginner's chess from this position. So if we go back to the position after d5, don't push your pawn. Instead, I'm going to advise you to play a little bit of a weird move, which is knight to d2, defending with the knight. And why do we choose this square instead of this one? Well, if the bishop comes to b4 to pin your knight, you can kick that bishop back where he came from. By the way, I'm also okay if you trade pawns here and you just play a symmetrical pawn structure. This is called the exchange variation, and if you really don't like your knight blocking your bishop, this is totally fine as well. You can now play knight f3, develop your bishop to one of these squares, castle, and play a regular type chess game. So a couple of options against the French, but again, you're mostly going to want to study e4, e5, and also e4, c5, the Sicilian, but I wanted you to know what to do against black's third most popular opening. Now, this video is not meant to be comprehensive, but it is meant to get you into reasonable chess positions as white, no matter what your opponent does against you as black. And in further ChessKid videos, we will go deeper and take a big dive into some other openings.